right, so this is a story that was told to me by my trusty firearms instructor named Chris. Back about 20 years ago, probably in like summer of 2000, something like that. He was invited by his brother to a cattle ranch up in the Idaho mountains for a weekend of hunting and hiking. His brother knows the owner of the cattle ranch. So Chris and his brother gathered their supplies and some of their best friends and took off to the mountains. Beautiful drive up there, beautiful windy roads through the steep Idaho mountains. And his brother at one point gave this cryptic warning to everybody though. He said, this cattle ranch, sometimes the owner's cattle escape and they wander off to the mountains and they have to go track them down. And the owner's told me that he's seen some strange creatures up there. He's not messing around, and everyone's just laughing, He's like, no, I'm serious, man. He told me he's seen some stuff out there. I'm not messing around, and they just don't take him seriously or whatever. And then, eventually they arrive at the cabin, and they all just hang out that night. And the next day, Chris decides to actually go hunting in the afternoon with one of his buddies. So they get their rifles and they hop in a truck and they take off down the dirt road that leads deep into the mountain. And the dirt road stops right in front of a creek, not quite a river or stream, just kind of a creek. And so they get out of the car, get out of the truck, and walk towards the stream. And then they decide, Chris is like, I'm going to go this way up the stream, and his friend's going to go downstream. They'll split up, cover more ground that way. So they split up, and he's walking upstream, and he notices there's this big green pine tree that snapped towards the water, snapped in the direction of the water. And there's no reason for this giant big green pine tree to be snapped like that. So he walks over there and examines it, and he sees these 4 huge finger indentations on the big green pine tree, where it's something squeezed the bark super hard to pull the tree down, and sap is bubbling up from where the finger marks are. At that point, he notices this terrible smell in the area that he described it to me like this. All right. He's like, it's a mixture of sulfur, blood and guts, and shit. And he'd never smelled anything like that before. Then he looks down and he sees giant barefoot tracks, huge tracks, 16 inches long. And I asked him, 5 toes? And he's like, yep, 5-toe tracks. And there were many of them just stamped right into the sill, right next to the creek. So he starts following them. He counted them as he's following them into the woods. He counted 73 beautiful tracks that led him to another green pine tree that was snapped in the direction of the creek. And all around this broken pine tree were many more footprints. They just danced around the tree, and the smell was just getting worse, and he got spooked. He got real spooked at this, and he's like, I'm going to head back. So he starts running back towards the truck. When he gets there, he finds that his friend had shot a deer. His friend had successfully hunted the deer, and he told them about the tracks and about the tree, and so they threw the deer in the truck, and they took off back to the cabin. They unloaded the dead deer at the cabin, and then he told everyone else at the cabin about what he had seen. So a few hours pass, and the excitement builds, and everyone's like, man, let's go back out there. Let's go back out there. So they all loaded themselves up with a rifle and a pistol, and they all hopped in the truck and took off down towards the end of the dirt road. And the sun had set at this point, and it was a clear, beautiful, starry night, but no moon. So it was pretty dark, right? So they parked the car facing the creek at the end of the path, and they all hop out on foot and walk towards the edge of the water. They're just waiting, just talking and waiting, looking at the beautiful stars. And at one point they howl out into the night, calling for the creature that pulled down the tree. And they don't get anything. They're just waiting. But then all of a sudden, Chris, he thinks he can start to hear something moving in the trees up the creek. like the direction where he found that snap tree, but he can't hear it for sure. It's hard to get a clear sound because the water's so loud, right? So he leaves the group and goes by himself into the forest. And he walks a ways in there. He just stops and listens. And he can definitely hear something big crashing through the forest coming towards them. So he runs back to the group. He's like, guys, something is definitely approaching from upstream. And then from downstream, they start to hear the same like cracks and footsteps coming towards them. So now these sounds are coming towards them from both directions. And they're getting louder and louder coming from the downstream side. Sounds like they can hear footsteps like crushing branches and stuff under the mud as it's getting closer and closer, until all of a sudden this huge thwop crunch of a huge log or something underneath the mud was so loud and so close to them that they all freaked out and they ran back to the truck, right? And like less than 2 minutes, they make it back to the truck and turn on the lights and fire the truck up. And as soon as they turn on the lights, they can see right where they were standing these two massive, like 8-foot tall bipedal creatures, and their eyes reflect the light of the truck. And everyone had clear shots with their rifles at those two creatures moving towards them, but everyone just were freaking out and like screaming, turning back to the cabin, drove back in fear, you know? Like, what the heck? So they drive back and they race back there, and then there's that dead deer outside the cabin, and then they can smell that terrible smell. So they all go back to the cabin and they sleep cuddled up with their guns that night, but, you know, nothing else happens. They didn't get messed with, and the next day, his younger brother is like, I told you, man, I told you, I wasn't messing around. And he thinks he ran into like a family of Sasquatch up in those mountains.
Yeah, man, I was gonna say that's definitely a Sasquatch related story, you know. Man, it's always cool to hear about stories like that. And so you said this was your firearm instructor that told you the story.
That's right.
How long did you know him? So it sounds pretty consistent with other reports.
Oh, I've known him for like, it's got to be over 10 years now. Yeah,
it's a long time. He's sounds like he's kind of a no bullshit kind of guy. So you definitely take that one to the heart.
Oh yeah, I never expected him to tell that kind of story. I mean, he's an ex-military paratrooper, so he's like a mountain man. He's real serious.
Yeah, whenever I hear that kind of stuff, when the witness is credible, is really interesting to me, because it's like, why would a guy like that make up a story, you know, about two Sasquatch, you know, screwing with them in the woods while they were on a hunting trip? You know, it doesn't make sense. You know, a lot of people like to write off these stories as, oh, it's just an old, you know, campfire story, you know, or the big fish tale, or someone says they caught a big fish kind of thing. But I just don't see that happening as often as people think it does, you know, and there's always the consistency too that you can't ignore, because, you know, in my opinion, these are probably some type of hominid, so there's the behavioral consistency between the reports. And hearing the story come from you, man, I'm definitely a firm believer that he really encountered something that night.
Oh yeah, man, he kind of really helped me believe it too. You know, like things like the smell and like snapping the trees towards the water and stuff like that. I never heard those details before, and then the more I researched other people's encounters, the more details popped up that were like identical to his story, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, were you a believer before he told you this story, or you know, did you ever look into the topic at all, really?
I mean, not too much, really. See, like I saw UFOs, you know, like some pretty crystal clear, amazing UFOs, and it kind of opened my mind up to like, wow, maybe some of this is a possibility. And then I remembered that like 9 years ago, he had told me that he saw Sasquatch in the mountains, but I just completely blew it off, you know, like, oh yeah, right, you know, whatever, you guys must have been drunk or something. And so he didn't tell the story. But then after I saw the UFOs, I'm like, all right, man, I'm going to ask him about that. And yeah, then he told me, and now it just seems like, I don't know, man, I believe him. I saw the wild look in his eyes, and I believe it.
Why don't you touch on those UFOs real quick? You know, I've seen lights in the sky, and you know, I've got some pretty good photos that I've put up on the Facebook page that me and a friend have actually captured. You know, and we really still don't have an explanation for what we saw that night. You know, why don't you tell me about your UFO sighting, man?
All right. Nice, man. Yeah, okay, so the very first time that I saw UFOs was, I remember, man, it was Easter, and we were all, me and like 14 people were out camping up on the mountains, and I had like a really nice laser pointer, and all of a sudden, you know, we're pointing up at the sky, and then there's these two giant glowing orbs of light, like moving across the horizon, and everyone's like, what the heck is that? And there's like this brief moment where we're all just kind of staring at it in awe. And then someone had my laser pointer and they pointed at them, and for some reason that just set the whole camp off, and we're all like freaking out, like, whoa, these UFOs. They're just these beautiful glowing orbs of light moving across the sky that went all the way across the horizon until they like disappeared behind the mountains. And man, that was like so amazing. And so after that, you know, I really kept my eyes out, and I saw more of them, man. Just like a huge bright glowing orb of light going straight up one night, and then it curves, and now it's going straight to the side, and all of a sudden another one appears below and to the right of the first one, and they're moving at the same speed, going straight to the side, and then they just both like fade away. But I actually saw it through a telescope, like through a 300x telescope, and even like 300x is just this beautiful orb of luminescence. It's so amazing. And one of my favorite UFO encounters, I was just hanging out outside one night over my town. I saw this giant black triangle with these three like ovals of dim light underneath it in each of the corners, silently gliding above my town. And it was huge, man. It was like, you know, it was huge, and I just couldn't believe it. And man, I don't know, these UFOs have really stoked my... It's kind of like if you found out Santa was real, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like amazing, you know?
Right. You always hear the stories, but then once you kind of brush it off, and then you see one, and you're like, whoa, you know, it's real. Well, now I gotta look into it, you know? And it's interesting that you said they were orange, because the ones that I photographed were orange also. The ones that I was looking at had they had kind of like flame trails coming off of them, but like, you know, it was so weird because they would reascend into the sky and stuff, and they were dancing around and doing loops and stuff around each other, and then they eventually just disappeared. But
wow.
You know, it's weird, man, to see the UFO stuff. It's always fun. And I think one day I'll see another one, you know, and maybe I'll have a better camera next time, but you know, it's cool. It's cool to see it, man, you know. And I guess I want to ask you, what do you think Sasquatch is, first of all, and then what do you think that the UFOs are? Are they aliens or interdimensional something else? You know, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, when it comes to Sasquatch, let's start with that one. I do think that they're probably just like, you know, a branch of the evolutionary tree that went towards like strength and size when humans went towards, you know, intelligence. And they're pretty much probably just another earthling, you know, just another group of hominoid people. I don't know, could have been manipulated by the whole, like, genetic engineering, creating maybe like the Nephilim, you know, I don't know. But I just think that they're like a flesh and blood actual creature, earthling creature that, you know, is a living being just like us, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair opinion. You know, that's kind of in the same boat that I'm into. So, so what do you think about the aliens, man? Are they aliens? What are they?
You know, I think at this point, they're most likely piloted by humans, but perhaps the technology was assisted by extraterrestrials. I think that's quite plausible. But also just Nikola Tesla, man. You know, I'm absolutely sure that he's contributed to some of the top secret technology we got going on here. Just like, hey, man, you know, you want to teach me how to drive one of those? You know, like, you want to give me a job, dude? I'll work with you guys.
Well, dude, that's what's crazy. A lot of people don't know this about Nikola Tesla, but he was like involved in some really interesting stuff. And from what I understand, is when he died, because he died in a hotel, by the time that a family member was able to go and like get to the body and all that kind of stuff, the feds had already been there and confiscated his journal and stuff, which is really interesting. Took all his designs. Yeah, and I'm like, what was he working on? What was in that journal that was so important that the feds would go out of their way to go and take it? You know, what information was in that journal? You know, it makes you wonder what else he was involved with. You know, and he was doing some crazy stuff that we're now just doing today. You know, he was trying to do like wireless power and stuff like that. You know, he was working on some crazy stuff back then that he was, you know, the material science wasn't there yet for him, but you know, he clearly knew what he was doing, and crazy to think about. Just if he was alive today, he would be doing crazy stuff.
Oh man, you know, I think that the energy companies just wouldn't have it. You know, they're like, this dude's going to provide free energy to everybody, and I'm trying to make trillions of dollars for 100 years. So we're not going to endorse that. And I think that's quite a shame. But then at the same time, I start thinking, it's like, man, can you imagine if the Nazis had like free unlimited energy? So kind of conflicted when I think about it. But I do believe that he was an absolute genius. And it's kind of a shame that he wasn't able to build everything that he could have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I agree, man. And yeah, that's one way to look at it, man. You know, is there's that conflict there where it's like, you know, you could do a lot of good with this technology, but you could also do a lot of really bad stuff with this technology if it gets to the full functional stage of, you know, his idea of what it could have been, you know. So, but yeah, no, like a lot of people don't know a lot about Nikola Tesla, and that he was actually trying to work on these like free technologies and free power and stuff like that. You know, it's pretty interesting. You know, there's a lot of stuff like that where it makes me wonder. You know, a lot of people also don't know this, is that the whole light bulb industry is actually like really corrupt. And I remember reading somewhere that they were intentionally like making it so light bulbs wouldn't last as long as the technology would allow them to and stuff like that. And then any company that actually produced good bulbs would get fined and stuff like that because of the regulations they had implemented. And it's like, dude, what? And a lot of people don't know that. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. That's like a thing that was actively in practice for a long time. So
seems like they're limiting our technology just through greed, you know?
Well, it's like, what do we not know about, you know? Like, Elon Musk is doing some crazy stuff, but it's like, he's just one party. It's like, what else do we not know about that's, you know, not available to us?
Oh, man, you know, it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if they got some bases on stuff and they're just keeping it real secret.
Yeah, man, I don't know. It also goes back to the whole thing where, you know, not to get into the too conspiracy territory, but you know, they do the moon landing and I like, as far as I'm concerned, I think the moon landing's real and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, whenever I hear that, oh, you know, the landing craft and stuff that we used to get on the moon, we lost all that information. Yeah, we don't have it. We can't go back. Like, what? How did you lose that technology? And now they have to redesign it and basically redo it. I'm like, how do you lose something like that? You know, one of the greatest feats of mankind is, you know, space travel. And it's like, oh yeah, we lost the technology to get to the moon and land on the moon. It's like, bro, what? You lost the designs to the landing craft? How does that happen? You know?
Man, I mean, the way I see it, like, I've seen these crazy things flying around. Like, they've got to be using those. So I don't know. It seems like just a front. Like, I'm not exactly sure what their intentions are for not disclosing this technology to the public, but sometimes I think it might have to do with just like, you want the terrorists to have spaceships? I don't know, man.
Yeah, man. It's weird stuff, man. But we're actually getting to the end of our time slot here, and I had a great time chatting with you and hearing about that secondhand story of yours and hearing about your UFO story, you know, and I'd like to thank you for coming on, man.